Hello and welcome to another episode of the SEO Unplugged podcast. I'm your host, Itamar Blauer. Today, I'm joined with Nick Wilsdon, who is the founder and CEO of Talk and also an SEO veteran. Nick, good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, hi Itamar. Yeah, I'm very good, thanks. Yeah, it's been a very fun week this week.
Great. All right, cool. So let's jump right into it because you've been in the SEO industry pretty much since the beginning. So could you just give a bit of context in terms of when you actually started working in SEO and how that came about?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, uh, God, it's coming up to 25 years now from when I started. But I can't say I was kind of the first. I was very early on in the UK, but there were certainly I was kind of one of the youngest of those initial generations, and I think I was very lucky to have some of the seniors like Dixon, Amon, some of the very senior people kind of helped me in those early years, which I really appreciate at this point in my career. But yeah, how did I kind of get into it? It was an interesting move, really. I'd been studying sociology at university, and I'd always been very good at computers. And I think I'd kind of at that point thought I wasn't entirely sure that my career was going to be in sociology. Really, you kind of had it been a fun degree, but I was trying to think, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? And computers come out, the internet was out. I was quite excited about it, so I started making web pages. And then for my end of year, can't say dissertation, but that sounds a bit grandiose, really. It's more like a study that you do at the end of the 3 years. And usually, what people do is they go and ask 20 of their friends to go and answer some questions, and they bring back those results. And I built a website, and I thought this is great. I'll build a website, I'll do a questionnaire, I'll put it out on the Usenet groups, and I did that, and I got a huge number of responses because people were just so willing to help someone doing a study back in those days. So yeah, I ended up with a really good study, and it was a very interesting way of kind of getting into web, getting into kind of making websites. I remember the domain name was particularly funny because I think it was something like sociologyproject.com, and I think after my degree, the sociology department had to speak to me to work out how I could hand this piece of valuable internet property back to the university. So they were getting advice from the computer science facility, faculty, in terms of how do we get this guy to hand over this? We can't possibly leave university with this valuable piece of the internet. So I kind of had to make sure that was all kind of given to them, and I thought that was quite funny in retrospect. But that got me into my first web job in 1999, and I helped build websites. But then, as part of that, the team I was with had built an HTML editor, eHTML, and I was fascinated by this. So I was kind of teaching people HTML, but I wanted to get more downloads, really. So I started thinking, well, I'll build some sites, and we did review sites, and I'd have reviews of different HTML editors, Nick Bradbury's home site, Coffee Cup, some of the early ones, and I'd write review sites, and I'd put our editor at the top of the reviews. Great kind of pioneering SEO efforts, and we would get downloads, and that was a fantastic way to learn SEO because it meant that I had a conversion. And back then, not many people had a conversion in SEO. SEO was still kind of, let's put a brochure online and try and get some attention. But I actually had a conversion point, and that really kind of focused me down into SEO because then everything became about the journeys and the touch points that you took the user through to get them to convert, which is kind of our bread and butter now. But back then that was a quite a kind of advanced concept. And I remember speaking to Ammon back then, and he got this very, very early on, and he was talking about kind of landing paths into your site. That people wouldn't always come through the homepage; they would come in through various various journeys through various pages to these. So some people got it back then, but that was very, very early for that kind of understanding in SEO. So yeah, it was a great introduction, really. And then I kind of met a lot of the US SEOs because there weren't many UK ones really then. So we were kind of online, and we were in communities like Threadwatch in particular, Creator Site, and then Spin, which was Danny Sullivan's site, which I kind of helped build for him. But yeah, so that was kind of a good introduction really to the SEO industry.
Wow. Yeah, that's really fascinating, that sort of shift. And I guess I suppose with your almost pioneering in terms of the thought process you had back in the day in terms of how you can get more conversions on a site, even if it was for, projects or whatnot. But I suppose when we think of traditional entities or the core types of pillars within SEO, how you've got, your technical, you've got content, you've got links. So I suppose within that, you kind of hit the content side, making like different review websites, but also links as well, because you would have been mentioning the other site and linking to it as well. So at what point did you sort of think more about maybe the pillars of SEO as we know them today back then when it wasn't defined, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it was. I didn't really feel like we had very clear pillars back then. We had the latest techniques that we would talk about in the forums would say, "Oh, we think this works at the moment." Wasn't a lot of clarity really in terms of SEO, and you have to think that SEO then was just much smaller really. So we would talk about all kind of aspects of SEO, whether we were doing a tweak in the code, whether we were finding a way to get backlinks. Eric Ward was talking a lot about how to get links and how to build that link profile. So, but all of that kind of mixed into the same forums really, and it's only uh, relatively recently that's kind of really broadened out, and SEO has become this massive broad church now of different disciplines. But we would try what worked. I think it would be fair to say that we kind of chased the algorithm really, which I think was kind of how you defined SEO back then. We would try and understand what Google liked. People would jump on these techniques, and then Google would stop them, or Google would release an algorithm. Would all try to work out what's Google rewarding now, and all trying to change everything. So you had a kind of it was a discipline where we largely chased Google or reacted to Google. We didn't tend to do our own thing or have our own path, and I think that's what's really changed now with old SEO and new SEO. New SEO, especially at enterprise level, you really have to have your own plan, and whether Google makes these updates or not, your plan carries on regardless. You kind of take notice of core updates, but that isn't your entire SEO effort. Your SEO effort has a sort of structure, and as you say, you have activities that you do in content, you have activities you do in linking, or especially for enterprise internal linking and product SEO, and you have activities you're doing on technical. So yeah, it's a lot more. We're less driven by the search engines now, I would say.
Hmm.
But I may be talking more from an enterprise point of view. But yeah.
No, but that's fine. I suppose nowadays things are a lot more proactive as opposed to reactive, which is what you're
Yeah.
suggesting was back in the day. But if we talk in terms of like today's standards, SEO is something that people sell. It's used as a service. So back in the day, what was that like? How did you, or at what point did you realize actually I can make some money off of providing this as a service to other businesses? So what was that like?
It was very hard to sell individually on its own back then, almost impossible. So we would be doing development, and then you had this idea that on top of the development, you would then get some additional resource to do some promotion. And I think when I set up my own business after I left that initial company, I set up my own SEO agency in 2000 back in Brighton. And I think we were largely selling it on three pillars. Create, host, promote were the three pillars of the business, and you kind of had to sell it collectively. So often you wouldn't get brought in as the SEO team on an existing build. You would do this as something that enhanced your web building part of the business. So it was very hard to kind of take the two apart really. It had only really just started really being sold on its own really at that point. Not to everyone. Some people were getting contracts for that, and I think certainly Ammon Johns has some amazing stories of some of the early jobs that he got, where he would kind of meet people, clients in service stations, and you get paid in cash, and it was all very very shady almost. I think SEO, and I think that's kind of the history. The beginnings of SEO were very very shady in a way, because we were seen as almost not quite akin to hacking, but somewhere in that kind of gray area where you were kind of you were working out how Google worked, and you were doing something mysterious to kind of hack Google and earn a disproportionate amount of attention from Google. So some of those early techniques were seen in that kind of light, and I think that's probably why there weren't a lot of companies going out looking for SEO services, because it was a little bit shady and mysterious back then.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I can't imagine a business owner is just going to sort of rock up in a tinted window SUV, sort of to a parking lot of a gas station, service station, and get a wad of cash out and say, "Here you go, get me some get me some SEO." But
Yeah.
that's That's fascinating. So how I guess with that, and you mentioned before that in the UK there weren't really many SEOs in the UK. So I suppose you would have been connected with SEOs across the world through forums. And do was it that, let's say, the US was sort of the biggest or had the biggest concentration of people doing SEO at the time? And how did you sort of form relationships with people from these sort of forums?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the industry was very much focused in the US back in the early days. Absolutely, and it was much smaller. So we had a group of forums that almost everybody was on, which sounds probably quite funny to new SEOs when they see the size of something like Brighton SEO alone. That's absolutely huge now. But it was very much smaller then. We had forums where that sort of webmaster world was obviously Brett's one was huge, but ThreadWatch was kind of a bit more edgy. I think Nick Wilson ran that. Um, Spin was obviously Danny Sullivan ran that one, and it was a bit kind of news orientated, but very much like Reddit. And I think sort of what I did kind of coming in, and I moderated some of those forums, so that kind of got me the friendships really through the industry that I had, and that's probably why I know quite a lot of the older SEOs, because we were all moderating everyone else. But the industry was very much based around the US, and that's been a change. I've seen over the years that industry just become global now, and you have little pockets where you have, you know, the French SEO scene, which is completely separate from everyone else. You have over India SEO scenes, you have the US scene, you have a massive European scene. So it really has expanded, really, the whole industry. But back then it was very orientated towards the US.
I see. And so at what point, or what's the sort of earliest memory that you've got when there were sort of meetups, like actual offline meetups with SEOs and events, and where was that in the world?
Yeah, yeah. These would be the conferences. So and the conferences were quite amazing. And that would be where you'd meet up with your friends from the industry. You'd meet people, physically. And I went over to the US a lot for those early conferences. But to kind of put that into perspective, I'd moved to Russia in around 2001. So I'd gone out to Russia. I'd started setting up an SEO agency out in Russia. So I was quite kind of remote, and I think I was kind of quite known for working in that market. So I used to come from Russia over to the US quite regularly to go to PubCon in Vegas, or SES, or the big American conferences, and that was something we kind of did fairly regularly. But yeah, the conferences were amazing. It was a great way to kind of meet those people. You learned so much, not only from the presentations but from each other, and we had all these kind of informal conversations and informal conversations about what was working, and then the social aspect. And I think that's kind of put me in the place I am now, where I do. So many of my friends are within the SEO industry. I think that's fair to say. I've got a lot of very good long-term friends from SEO, and I think that's one of the reasons I really like the community. I think the community is fantastic. It's like very few other industries.
Hmm. No, absolutely. And would you say, in terms of sort of your experience, which is almost 25 years, is there anything that you really miss from the early days that you don't get much of now, or vice versa, potentially as well?
Um, I think in some respects I miss the industry being so small, because we did all know each other. You know, all of the yeah, we all knew each other. I mean, that's fair to say. Really, in the SEO industry, it was fairly small, and if you went to a conference, let alone if you kind of spoke at them, you kind of knew all the other SEOs. So that's sometimes something I miss, which was that was a great feeling. You kind of met up, and it's almost like one big family, really. Um, I think, however, I'm glad that the industry has developed and matured, because I think all of us back then wanted SEO to be respected and to be a respectable career that someone could come into, and that we would be able to speak to the C-suite in a large company in the same way that they speak to them from paid, or from affiliates, or from any other channel. So I think SEO has kind of gained that credibility, and I think that's fantastic. We are a kind of respected discipline in itself now, and that needed to happen. You know, the industry needed to grow up and mature. So I'm not disappointed with where we are now as an industry.
Hmm. No, I mean, that's absolutely fair. And I suppose, in the grand scheme of things, you would have seen the potential of something like SEO back then. And I suppose it must be quite a nice feeling to see how it's developed over the years. And, as a last sort of question, do you think we're sort of heading in the right direction with things as they are now? Would you have imagined back then that you would see some of the stuff you've seen now within SEO, or the way that sort of Google has evolved?
Uh, I think there's kind of I always see two sides to the industry. I see from a professional side. I love the way that Google is gives us more information now, that we have more knowledge really in terms of making these changes. We're not guessing things anymore. We're not hearing them secondhand on a forum of something that may or may not be true. We have quite a disciplined approach now to SEO. We can test things. We can have a methodical, scientific approach. We've got fantastic tool sets. You know, we have APIs. We have so many things at our disposal to make this a very sort of transparent and um, you know, rewarding kind of service that we're giving to clients, and I love all that. In terms of the industry, I probably say this as like an old white guy. I'm kind of glad that the industry is becoming a bit more diverse and representative, and I'm glad that the industry is, there's some fantastically talented women within the industry now that are absolutely leading it. I mean, look at people like, Leda Solis, Cindy Crum, some of these people there, they, absolutely leadership positions within the industry. And that's not only just from a US perspective, that's kind of a global perspective. So I think that's a good kind of maturing of the industry. And that's not to say we can't do better, but it certainly seems to me that it's kind of moving in the right direction, which is good. Certainly when you have the sort of 25-year view that I think I've got, it's definitely improved. But it's a great career to get into if you're coming into it. Part of me doesn't understand why there aren't more SEOs really, because I think we always within SEO we thought this is great, but the developers are going to pick this up. Surely the developers are going to learn how to implement schema. Surely the developers are going to fix this or do this. And this never really happened. And I do understand that, because there's a lot to understand, a lot to get hold of within development. I mean, that's a whole field in itself. But I think I always thought that a lot of SEO fixes would kind of get taken up within the development streams, and I think I still am quite surprised that so little have, and how much work there is in SEO. I think there is a huge amount of work in SEO, and it's one of those industries where you can get very good within 2-3 years, which is great. I mean, I don't think you could say that as a doctor or as an architect. Sort of someone who really dedicates themselves to SEO can be phenomenal within 3 years. Absolute top of their game.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a very valid point, especially with all the resources that are out there, which I'd imagine, like you said, weren't there at the time as well. But this has been such a very interesting conversation, really, to learn about sort of the early days of SEO, what it was like in the past. Because, back then I was an infant, let's say. So I would have had no clue. So for me, in terms of when I sort of started getting involved in it, I definitely saw that there was a lot of resource out there already, and like you said, it's very, very quick to learn if you've got that good mindset. But yeah, Nick, thanks so very much for coming on the podcast. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about yourself or talk?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, come. I'm I still am on X, formerly known as Twitter, I guess, under Nick Wilsdon. I don't know how long any of us will still be on that platform, but that's probably the best place to find me. Yeah, and then I shall see which one takes over, whether it's LinkedIn or Threads or something else. Mastodon yet to see decided, but you can find me pretty easily on any of those platforms, and I'm always happy to kind of help people out and answer questions. So get in touch.
Amazing. Nick, thank you so very much. And yeah, for everyone listening as well, hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you in the next one. Hey, you've reached the end of this video, but don't worry, there's plenty more great content that you can watch right now. All you have to do is click one of the 2 video links on the left side of the screen. And also, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to never miss out on future uploads.